The living room was bathed in the soft glow of a late Sunday afternoon, the kind of light that made everything feel deceptively calm. Rebecca sat on the edge of the couch, her fingers tracing the frayed seam of a cushion, her eyes fixed on the television. The roar of the football game filled the room, a relentless tide of cheering fans and booming commentary that Nathan lived for. He was sprawled in his recliner, a beer in one hand, his gaze locked on the screen as if it held the secrets of the universe. To him, it probably did. Rebecca, at 42, carried herself with a quiet strength that had weathered years of compromises. Her dark hair was pulled into a loose bun, strands escaping to frame her sharp, thoughtful face. She was a paralegal, her days spent navigating the intricate details of other people's legal battles, but at home, she often felt like she was fighting a war of attrition. Nathan, a logistics manager who thrived on schedules and control, had a way of making her feel like her victories outside their home meant nothing within its walls. "Third down, come on," Nathan shouted, leaning forward, his voice drowning out the commentator. The game was tied and his intensity was palpable, a force that seemed to suck the air from the room. Rebecca glanced at him, her lips pressing into a thin line. She'd planned to spend the afternoon reading, maybe even talking to Nathan about the leak in the kitchen ceiling, but the game had taken precedence, as it always did. It wasn't just football, it was his domain, his sanctuary, and she was expected to respect it. She stood, smoothing her sweater, and walked to the kitchen to refill her coffee. The act was a small rebellion, a momentary escape from the noise. As she poured the dark liquid into her mug, she caught her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, a faint crease between her brows. When had she started looking so worn? The thought lingered as she returned to the living room, her steps deliberate. Nathan didn't notice her return, his focus unbroken. The game was in its final minutes, the score still nodded. Rebecca stood by the couch, coffee warming her hands, and felt a spark of defiance ignite. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She was tired of the noise, tired of the way Nathan's world seemed to eclipse hers. Without a word, she reached for the remote on the coffee table and pressed the power button. The screen went black. Silence crashed into the room like a wave. Nathan's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What the hell, Becca?" His voice was low, a warning shot. He set his beer down with a deliberate thud, the recliner creaking as he straightened. "Turn it back on. Now." Rebecca's heart pounded, but she held her ground, the remote still in her hand. "I just want a little quiet, Nathan. It's been on all day." Her tone was calm, measured, but inside, she felt the weight of her words, the line she'd just crossed. His face darkened, a flush creeping up his neck. "You don't get to decide that. This is my time. My game." He stood, towering over her, his presence filling the room. "Turn on." She met his gaze, her jaw tight. "It's just a game, Nathan. We can talk for 5 minutes without it." The words were out before she could stop them, and she saw the shift in his eyes, something raw, something wounded. It wasn't just about the game, she realized. It was about control, about the unspoken rules that had governed their marriage for years. Nathan took a step closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think you can just take that from me? Humiliate me in my own house?" His hand shot out, snatching the remote from her grip. For a moment she thought he'd turn the TV back on, but he didn't. Instead, he hurled the remote across the room. It hit the wall with a crack, plastic splintering. Rebecca flinched, her coffee mug slipping from her hands and shattering on the hardwood. The sound was deafening in the silence that followed. She stared at the shards, her breath shallow as Nathan's anger seemed to coil tighter, a spring ready to snap. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice trembling with something deeper than rage, humiliation maybe, or fear. "This is my space. My rules." He turned away, running a hand through his hair, then stopped, his shoulders rigid. When he faced her again, his eyes were cold, calculating. "You need to learn what happens when you disrespect me." Before she could react, he was moving, his hand closing around her wrist with bruising force. He pulled her toward the bathroom, his steps purposeful, her protests drowned by the blood rushing in her ears. The door slammed shut behind them, and in the harsh light of the fluorescent bulb she saw the clippers in his hand, His clippers, the ones he used for his own hair. "Nathan, stop," she said, her voice breaking, but he was beyond hearing. He pushed her against the sink, the cold porcelain biting into her back. The clippers buzzed to life, a mechanical growl that filled the small space. She struggled, but his grip was iron, his face a mask of grim determination. "This is what you get," he said, almost to himself, as he pressed the clippers to her scalp. The first pass was a shock, the vibration jarring, the sound obscene. Strands of her dark hair fell to the floor, pooling around her feet like spilled ink. Rebecca's eyes stung, but she refused to cry, refused to give him that. She stared at her reflection in the mirror, watching as the woman she knew disappeared, strip by strip, until her scalp was bare, vulnerable, exposed. When it was over, Nathan stepped back, the clippers falling silent. His chest heaved, his face a mix of triumph and something like regret. Rebecca didn't move, didn't speak. She looked at herself in the mirror, her shaven head a stark alien thing. But beneath the shock, beneath the humiliation, she felt something else. A spark. A seed of something fierce and unyielding. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The bathroom mirror held Rebecca's gaze. Her reflection a stranger with a bare scalp and eyes that burned with something new. The clippers lay silent on the counter, Nathan's heavy breathing the only sound in the small tiled room. He stood behind her, his hands flexing as if unsure what to do with themselves. For a moment neither spoke, the weight of what he'd done settling like dust after a storm. Then, without a word, he turned and left, the door clicking shut behind him. Rebecca stayed there, rooted, her fingers tracing the uneven stubble on her head. The sensation was foreign, raw, like touching a wound. She wanted to scream, to shatter the mirror, to demand why. But she didn't. Instead, she inhaled sharply, forcing the chaos in her chest to still. This wasn't the time for breaking. Not yet. She cleaned up the hair on the floor, each strand a reminder of Nathan's rage, his need to strip her down to something he could control. As she swept, her mind churned. How had it come to this? Years of marriage, of shared laughter and quiet mornings, reduced to this act of violence. She dumped the hair in the trash, tied the bag, and carried it outside to the bin, the cold night air biting her exposed scalp. The neighborhood was quiet, lights glowing in distant windows, and for a moment, she envied the normalcy of those other lives. Back inside, Nathan was in the living room, the TV off, a fresh beer in his hand. He didn't look at her, his jaw tight, as if she were the one who'd crossed a line. Rebecca paused in the doorway, her reflection faintly visible in the dark TV screen, a ghost of herself. She could feel the weight of his expectation, that she'd cry, beg, or retreat into silence, as she often had after his outbursts. But something had shifted. The spark she'd felt in the bathroom was growing, an ember of defiance that refused to be snuffed out. "I'm going to bed," she said, her voice steady, though her heart raced. Nathan grunted, still not meeting her eyes. She climbed the stairs, each step a deliberate act of composure, and locked the bedroom door behind her. Alone, she sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers brushing her scalp again. The humiliation was there, sharp and stinging, but beneath it was something else, clarity. Nathan had meant to break her, but he'd miscalculated. This wasn't her end. It was her awakening. The next morning, Rebecca faced the world with her shaven head, a scarf wrapped tightly around it. At work, colleagues cast curious glances, but she deflected questions with a tight smile and a vague mention of a new look. She moved through her day with mechanical precision, filing documents, answering emails, but her mind was elsewhere, sifting through memories like a detective searching for clues. She thought of the early days with Nathan, the way he'd charmed her with his confidence, his certainty. Back then, it had felt like strength. Now she saw it for what it was, a need to dominate, to shape her into an extension of his will. Flashbacks came unbidden, vivid and slow, like scenes from a film she hadn't known she was starring in. Their first apartment, where Nathan had insisted on choosing the furniture, dismissing her taste as cluttered. The dinner parties where he'd interrupt her stories, laughing them off as cute, but unimportant. The time she'd wanted to take a night class, and he'd convinced her it was a waste of time, his tone so reasonable she'd doubted herself. Each memory was a thread in a tapestry of control, woven so subtly she hadn't seen the pattern until now. At home, Nathan's behavior shifted. He was quieter, almost contrite, offering to make dinner one night, a rare gesture. But his eyes betrayed him, watching her for signs of weakness, testing the boundaries of his victory. Rebecca played along, thanking him softly, keeping her movements small, her words careful. She saw the satisfaction in his face, the belief that he'd won. It made her stomach twist, but it also fueled her resolve. She wasn't the compliant wife he thought he'd molded. Not anymore. She began to strategize, her rebellion quiet but deliberate. At night, when Nathan was asleep, she journaled in a small notebook she kept hidden under the mattress. She wrote about his tactics, the way he'd twist her words, make her question her memory, or use silence as a weapon. Writing it down was like mapping a battlefield, each entry a step toward understanding her enemy. She researched online too, in private browsing mode, reading about gaslighting and emotional abuse. The terms were clinical, but they fit, giving name to the invisible chains she'd worn for years. Rebecca also reached out to her friend Lila, a nurse with a no-nonsense warmth. Over coffee, she kept the scarf on, dodging Lila's gentle probing about her new style. Instead, she steered the conversation to hypotheticals, stories of a friend in a controlling marriage. Lila listened, her eyes narrowing, but didn't push. That friend, she said, needs to know she's worth more than that. The words lingered, a lifeline Rebecca tucked away for later. Meanwhile, Nathan's guilt surfaced in fleeting moments. She caught him staring at her sometimes, his expression conflicted, as if he wanted to apologize but couldn't find the words. Once he reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her rejection subtle but firm. It unnerved him. She could see it in the way his shoulders tensed, the way he drank more than usual. Good, she thought. Let him squirm. Her rebellion grew bolder. She started small, rearranging the kitchen cabinets when he was at work, knowing he'd notice, but wouldn't confront her directly. She wore clothes he'd once called too loud, standing taller when he frowned. Each act was a reclaiming, a chipping away at his control. She began to mirror his tactics too, using his own playbook against him. When he criticized her cooking, she'd smile and agree, then serve the same dish the next night, watching his frustration mount. When he raised his voice, she'd lower hers, her calmness a weapon that left him grasping for leverage. The tension in the house was a tightrope, and Rebecca walked it with growing confidence. She was no longer the woman Nathan had shaved into submission. Her shaven head, once a symbol of his dominance, was becoming something else, a badge of survival, a reminder of the strength she was uncovering. She wasn't ready to confront him, not yet, but she was preparing. Each day, she grew sharper, more attuned to the game they were playing. Nathan thought he held all the cards, but Rebecca was rewriting the rules. One night, as they sat across from each other at the dinner table, Nathan's eyes lingered on her scarf. "You ever gonna take that thing off?" he asked, his tone half teasing, half challenging. Rebecca met his gaze, her lips curving into a faint smile. "When I'm ready," she said, her voice soft but unyielding. His fork paused midair, a flicker of unease crossing his face. In that moment she knew. He was starting to sense the shift, the power slipping from his grasp. The game was far from over, but Rebecca was no longer just a player. She was becoming the one who set the board. The air in the house had grown thick with unspoken challenges, a chessboard where every move was calculated, every glance a gambit. Rebecca had spent weeks honing her strategy, her quiet rebellion weaving a web around Nathan's fragile control. Her shaven head, now covered by a sleek silk scarf, was no longer a mark of shame, but a silent declaration of her transformation. She moved through their shared life with a precision that unnerved him, her compliance a mask for the strength building beneath. It was early summer, and the neighborhood was alive with the hum of barbecues and laughter. Nathan's family was hosting their annual gathering at their sprawling suburban home, a tradition Rebecca had once dreaded. Nathan thrived in these settings, playing the charming husband, his arm around her as if their marriage were a model of harmony. This year, She saw opportunity in the chaos of relatives and small talk. It was the perfect stage for her final act. The morning of the barbecue, Nathan was in high spirits, barking orders about what she should wear. A navy dress he deemed appropriate. Rebecca nodded, her face a picture of acquiescence. But when she emerged from the bedroom, she wore a vibrant red sundress, the kind he'd once called garish. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, his silence a concession she noted with satisfaction. She removed the scarf, her scalp now covered in a fine layer of regrowth, a soft buzz that felt like armor. She caught her reflection in the hall mirror and smiled. This was her the barbecue. The backyard was a swirl of activity. Children chasing each other, aunts gossiping over lemonade, Nathan's brother manning the grill. Rebecca played her part, laughing at jokes, passing potato salad, but her eyes were sharp, tracking Nathan's movements. He was in his element, regaling cousins with a story about a work triumph, his voice loud, his gestures expansive. But she saw the cracks, his quick glances her way, the way his laugh faltered when she spoke to someone else. He was watching her, waiting for her to slip, to prove he still held the reins. Rebecca bided her time, her plan coalescing as the afternoon wore on. She'd spent weeks preparing, not just mentally but practically. She'd saved money in a secret account, consulted a lawyer friend in hushed phone calls, and even packed a small bag, hidden in the guest room closet. But her escape wasn't about running. It was about dismantling the illusion Nathan had built, not just for her, but for everyone around them. The moment came as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the yard. Nathan's mother, a kind but oblivious woman, called for a toast to family. Glasses clinked, and Nathan seized the opportunity, standing with a grin, his arm sliding around Rebecca's waist. "To my beautiful wife," he said, his voice warm, performative. "Couldn't do it without her." The crowd cooed, but Rebecca felt his grip tighten, a warning dressed as affection. She turned to face him, her smile soft but her eyes steel. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, her voice carrying just enough to draw attention. "You've always known how to make me feel seen." The words were laced with something only he would catch, a challenge, a dare. His smile faltered, but before he could respond, she stepped out of his grasp, addressing the crowd. "I've been thinking a lot about what family means," she began, her tone conversational but deliberate. "It's about trust, respect, love. But sometimes it's also about honesty." She paused, letting the words settle, feeling the shift in the air as eyes turned toward her. Nathan's face stiffened, his hand twitching at his side. "For years, I thought love meant staying quiet," she continued, her voice steady, unwavering. "Letting someone else decide who I should be. But I've learned something recently." She touched her head, the short hair a tactile reminder of her journey. "Love doesn't mean control. It doesn't mean humiliation. It doesn't mean shaving your wife's head because she turned off your football game." A gasp rippled through the crowd, forks pausing, conversations halting. Nathan's mother froze, her glass halfway to her lips. His brother turned from the grill, eyes wide. Nathan laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. "Becca, come on, that's not." "Not what?" Rebecca cut in, her voice calm but cutting. "Not true. Or not something you want them to know." She faced him fully now, her posture open, unafraid. "You thought you could break me, Nathan. You thought you could strip me down to nothing. But you didn't. You showed me exactly who you are, and who I'm not." The yard was silent, the weight of her words pinning everyone in place. Nathan's face flushed, his mouth opening and closing, searching for a defense. "You're making a scene," he hissed, stepping closer, his voice low. "Stop this now." "No," she said simply, her voice a blade. "I'm done stopping." She turned back to the crowd, her gaze sweeping over their shocked faces. "I've spent years hiding his temper, his need to control everything. Me, this marriage, even what I think. But I'm not hiding anymore. And I'm not his to control." Nathan lunged forward, his hand reaching for her arm, but she stepped back, her movement swift, practiced. "Don't," she said, and the single word carried such authority that he froze. His family watched, some in horror, others in quiet realization. As the man they'd known unraveled under the weight of his own exposure, Rebecca's heart pounded. but her resolve was iron. She'd planned this moment, rehearsed it in her mind, but living it was electric. She wasn't just reclaiming her voice, she was shattering the myth of their perfect marriage, the one Nathan had used to cage her. She saw the doubt in his eyes, the dawning fear that he'd underestimated her, and it fueled her. "I'm not leaving you, Nathan," she said, her voice loud enough for all to hear. A final twist of the knife. "Not because I can't, but because I want you to live with this. With knowing I'm stronger than you ever gave me credit for. And I'll be here, every day, reminding you of it." She turned and walked away, through the stunned crowd, past the tables laden with food, toward the house. Whispers followed her, but she didn't care. She'd done what she came to do. Inside, she grabbed her purse, her movements calm, deliberate. She didn't need to run. She'd already won. Nathan didn't follow her, and she knew why. He was trapped, surrounded by family who now saw him differently, his control slipping through his fingers like sand. She drove home, the red dress vibrant against the fading light, her scalp tingling in the breeze from the open window. The future was uncertain, where she'd live, how they'd navigate this new reality. But one truth anchored her. Nathan's hold was broken. Back at the house, she stood in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back was fierce, unbroken, her short hair a crown of resilience. She didn't know what tomorrow held, but she knew who she was. And that was enough. The story didn't end with a neat bow, but with a lingering question. What does it mean to reclaim power? For Rebecca, it was this moment, this truth, this refusal to be anything less than herself. And as she stepped into the night, the weight of her victory settled around her, heavy but freeing, a promise of a life no one could take away.